Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. In the talk today, I'm going to talk about the symbolism of Mars or Mangal in Vedic Astrology, Jyotish. So let's get into it. A note just before diving in though, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. So let's talk about Mars, or Mangal in Sanskrit. It's also known as Angara, and its day, each planet has a day of the week. Its day is Tuesday, which happens to be today. When is Mars strong? Well, Mars owns Aries, or Mesha, and Scorpio, or Vrishika, those two constellations. We call them, owns it or rules those constellations. So when Mars is in those constellations, it's in its own house, so to speak, and so it's strong because it's in its own vibe, it's in its own environment, that sort of thing. Mars also is strong when, or in Ucha position, when it's exalted, and it's exalted in Capricorn or Makara. Swa, I already talked about. Swa basically means being in its own sign. So if Mars is in Aries or Scorpio, it's considered Swa, which gives it strength. Also, if Mars is retrograde, it is one of the planets that can go retrograde, or Vakri, that's considered, it gives strength to the planet. There's also directional strength, or Digbala, and so Mars has directional strength when it's in the 10th house or 10th bhava of a chart, and this represents, that position represents high noon, or the south, and high noon is going to be usually the hottest time of the day because that's when the sun is the strongest. But Mars is also a fiery planet, and so that's the relationship there. And you can see this picture of a little girl wearing a cape. You'll see why that picture is here pretty soon. So when is Mars weak? Mars is weak when it's debilitated, or Nicha, and it's debilitated in the sign of Cancer or Karka. It's also weak. It is one of the planets that can go combust. So when a planet gets too close to the sun, usually within about 10 degrees or so, that's combustion. I actually made a whole video on combustion if you're interested in learning more about what that is, what that signifies. But Mars is one of the planets that can go combust. Also, if Mars happens to be a planetary war loser, so planetary war happens when you have two true planets within 1 degree of each other. Actually, I also have a video on this if you're interested. That also, okay. Excuse me about that. I was trying to pause it, but I didn't catch myself in time. Sorry about that. So if Mars happens to be a planetary war loser, that will diminish its strength. It'll make it weaker and cause it to become less stable. Also, Mars, whenever it's in the first or last degree of any sign or any constellation, that position's called Sandhi, and that also destabilizes the planet. All right, so strengths and weaknesses of Mars. It also has relationships with other planets. So, depending on the relationship with the planet, when Mars is in certain constellations ruled by these planets, then it can increase the strength of Mars or decrease the strength of Mars or remain neutral. So when Mars is in friendly planets, which are owned by Sun, Moon, and Jupiter, Sun owns Leo, Mars owns Cancer, and Jupiter owns Sagittarius and Pisces. When Mars is in those signs, it actually gains a bit of strength. Not a tremendous amount of strength, but some degree of strength. When it's in signs of Venus and Saturn, which are Taurus, Libra, Capricorn, and Aquarius, it remains neutral. And when Mars is in houses ruled by Mercury, so Gemini and Virgo, then its strength is diminished a bit. So what are qualities of Mars or Mangal? Well, this is a planet that rules actions, initiative, courage, strength. So again, that's that fiery quality. Fiery, fire transforms, fire initiates, like it starts a car, it cooks your food, that sort of thing. So Mars has that kind of quality. It can be a bit erratic though. The sun is also a fire planet, but the sun tends to be constant, whereas Mars is a bit dodgy, frankly. And that's partly because of its path in the sky. It has the most erratic path in the sky. And so that erratic energy is also present in things that are Martian. Pitta dosha, if you're interested in Ayurveda, traditional Indian medicine, when you see Mars, you should assume there's some Pitta or fire there if you're looking at this from a medical standpoint. Mars is also considered a tamasic planet or an inactive planet, which seems a little bit counterintuitive, because Mars is an active planet, like it's restless, it's always moving, that sort of thing. But the tamasic quality, that's more of a, not so much of an outward movement, but it's more of it can be sort of the motivation, the deeper motivation. And so it can, if Mars is imbalanced or not properly balanced, it can lead towards kind of inertia, destruction, that sort of thing, because it's all that fire can actually burn things out and cause things to become debilitated. So you can kind of think about it that way. Mars is considered a masculine planet. It has masculine energy. So again, I'm just talking about this from a classical Vedic astrology perspective, not in terms of modern life, issues surrounding gender preference and that sort of thing, or gender identification. And Mars is also considered a natural malefic planet. So again, part of that natural maleficness comes from, one, this is a fiery planet, and again, like the saying goes, don't play with fire, it can burn you, right? So too much Mars can burn, can be destructive. And also the erratic nature of Mars, it's unpredictable. It's not constant. It kind of comes and goes, kind of like its path in the sky. And so because you can't kind of rely on it or predict it, it can cause sudden changes, sudden hard right turn in your life, that sort of thing, or something kind of come out of the blue that kind of disrupts the flow or constancy of life. So personification, so Mars, so who is Mars? Who is Martian? Mars describes people who are commander-in-chief, so like CEO of a company, somebody who's going to roll their sleeves up and get involved and start using that fire energy to manage, or be in charge or lead or fire up other people. All of that is, requires fire energy. Siblings, Mars represents siblings in birth charts. It represents males because of that masculine energy. People who are powerful, who are strong, who are passionate, and this can be of the mind, of the body. People who are ambitious, again, that's all fire energy. People who tend to be warriors, whether it's like a literal warrior like in the military, or like a thought leader, somebody who's like pushing for new ideas and new paradigms, or administrator, because again, that fire energy to organize and get other people motivated and moving. Traditionally, this is considered the Kshatriya or warrior caste. But again, the deeper meaning of caste in India is really about mindset, more than it's about, this group of people is better than the other. That kind of develops socially later on. But that's not the original intent of it. So this is considered like the warrior administrator caste. It can be people who are violent, angry, rash, hasty, violent, even like people who are, athletes. They have to use a lot of fire and energy to move their bodies and compete. Even if it's a friendly competition, they are competing. Martian people tend to persuade through punishment. So again, there's that kind of rulership, but rulership through force. Again, if this isn't balanced, and we're just talking generally about Mars. Again, if Mars is with a lot of benefic planets like Venus and Jupiter, that's going to be smoothed out. A lot of that, kind of erratic, fiery nature is going to be smoothed out. If it's with other malefic planets like Sun, Sun and Mars together, double fire energy. That's a lot of fire. Saturn gives stick-to-itiveness, so if Mars is the initiator and Saturn is the endurance, you can get somebody who just keeps going and going and going, like the Energizer Bunny. If it's with K2 Rahu, which are the shadow planets, the north and south node of the moon, which represent things that are sudden, hidden, erratic, then you double up on some of these. Again, they're neutral qualities, but again, more malefic energy from other malefic planets is going to start pushing Mars towards probably a less desirable direction, what most people would consider less desirable. People who have Mars that aspects into areas of the chart, like the first house that represents the body. People who are Martian tend to be short in height. Not always. Again, it depends on what else is around Mars. Variegated clothing, so clothing with different colors and things like that, that's Mars. And it can be, if we're looking at spouse or life partners, romantic partners, that sort of thing. It can represent partners that have been injured. Yeah. And you can see this picture here. This is, I actually went with the University of Chicago medical helicopter one day, and this guy was the doctor on the helicopter, and we went to a couple of accidents on highways. So apparently their helicopter, they are mostly used for things like traffic accidents, because there's no other way to kind of get in there because traffic gets backed up really far. Or they're involved in like organ transplant when they need to do like a really fast drive to another hospital to deliver organs, that sort of thing. So this is the doctor on the crew, and you can see, the plane is bright red, fiery, and his jacket's bright red. And he, as an emergency medicine doc, that's all Martian. That's a Martian type of medicine. Psychology, not always a Martian type of medicine. It's more of a moon type medicine, because moon represents the mind. So you can kind of, again, the pictures here were to kind of exemplify different aspects of Mars to help you remember them. So psychology, you can see this little figure here hanging from a rope, clearly a bit rambunctious, if not rebellious. Likes to live on the edge. Is good for an adventure. So that's all Mars. So on the positive side, Mars people, because of all that fire, they're very goal directed. Although they may not reach their goal always if they're inconsistent, which can be Mars, depending on where it's located and what else is around it. But strength, courage is a big, quality of Mars. Passion, action, competitiveness, the fighting spirit, generousness, passion, like a very fiery, warm person, if they're not too fiery or too warm or debilitated. On the negative side, you can see anger, irritability, hastiness, hostility, impatience, daredevils like recklessness, rebelliousness, inconsistency, lack of drive or courage, an all or nothing attitude, lack of boundaries, restlessness, obsessiveness, especially if it's linked up with other malefic planets. So, again, every energy is neutral, but when you start seeing where Mars is, is it weak, is it strong, and whether their planets are kind of involved with it, then you start to see like which side of Mars, is predominantly showing up for somebody and in their life. So professions, if Mars is linked to professions for somebody, you would probably start thinking about trades involving metals, especially gold, machinery, things connected with men, because again, that pretty strong masculine energy of Mars. Anything that involves fighting, like literal fighting, like, what do they call it? What's that movie with Brad Pitt? Oh, I'm blanking on it. Fight Club, right? Something like Fight Club. MMA fighters, that sort of thing, wrestlers, that sort of thing. Karate, martial arts, that's Mars. Any kind of profession that involves confrontation. Superheroes, they're all very Martian, actually, all that fire and movement and that sort of thing, even if it's of the mind. Anything involving heat, energy, electricity, chemistry, because of the metals, as well as the kind of chemical reaction, because that's you generally need fire for that. If there's no fire, it cools down and then you don't have a chemical reaction, right? It freezes, and slows down the chemical reaction. Engineers, because again, engineers deal with a lot of stuff. Cooking, chefs cooking, cookery, that sort of thing. Firefighting, again, you get that emergency, erratic nature, and then literally fire that they're dealing with. Anything involving cutting, like a butcher or surgeon. Real estate, it can be, that might seem kind of different, but Mars and Saturn are the two planets that represent property of the 9 planets, and so if you see Mars, it can actually mean somebody who's in real estate. Weapons, somebody who's into something adventurous, dangerous, even courageous. Military, police, it could be spies and thieves, because again, they need courage to do these things, and also they're a bit rebellious, right? I mean, spies and thieves are not exactly following the rules. So, that's their Martian nature coming out. I guess depending on whether you agree with what the spies and thieves are stealing or doing, it could be good or bad, I guess, depending on your perspective. Athletes, because again, they need that fire energy to move their bodies and push themselves. Law actually can involve Mars often, because again, in court, you're basically fighting with words. You may not be fighting with fists, but you're fighting with words. Innovators, so people are like forging a new path, that sort of thing, doing something a little different. Again, that's that kind of fire energy. They have enough drive to create a whole new road, because that takes a lot of energy rather than just following what everybody else is doing. It takes courage to do something that's kind of against the grain. People who work with their bodies, so this could be anybody, like dancers, yoga teachers, sort of like athletes. So Martian professions. So if we're talking medical stuff related to Mars, it represents the chest, the nose, muscle tissue, generally fever, heat, again, that fire energy, inflammation of all kinds, the liver, the gallbladder, the spleen. Those organs are involved with digesting food as well as generating blood supply, generating blood cells, blood supply. The adrenal glands, again, courage, fighting, skin rashes, heat, inflammation, and potentially a congestion of the liver, that sort of thing. Ulcers, again, so much heat, the tissue starts to break down. Wounds, injuries, burns, again, all that erratic kind of accidental stuff that happens. That's usually Mars is involved. It can be Rahu, Ketu as well, but I would first think of Mars. Surgery, because again, sharp instruments, cutting, right? Infections, all that inflammation, anemia, because it's sometimes related to, it's related to usually lack of B12, so B vitamins, so chemicals, or iron, metals, bleeding, can be Martian in nature. Disfigurement, again, because of wounds and injuries, operation, surgery, acute diseases, so things that kind of come on quick but don't stick around. Chronic diseases are more related to Saturn. Bone marrow, not necessarily blood, although, because because blood as a fluid is more ruled by the moon, but bone marrow, which generates the blood and all the fire and chemical reaction and building and stuff that has to actually create the blood, that's Martian. External sexual organs, Martian, because this is the libido or passion planet. Sex in general can be related to Mars. STDs, again, you have infections, sexual organs, libido, the urinary system, arguments. So Martian people, like, they're fiery. If some of them you push them a little bit, some of them you don't need to push. That's just kind of, again, their nature. They're just sort of argumentative, and they don't like to be told what to do. Like, they like to do their own thing. So they can get into arguments a lot, which can lead to problems. And then from an Ayurvedic perspective, Mars represents or rules the Rakta Dhatu, or the blood system. Again, it's a little bit different than the Western conventional sense of blood. Also, if Mars is weak or badly placed in a chart, that might indicate difficulties with siblings and or men. So places related to Mars, kitchens, again, heat, factories, heat, machines, we've talked about that. So you're probably starting to get a vibe now. Places near fire, because it's a fire planet, burned areas, places that have been ravaged, destroyed, battlefields, so again, all that fire, battlefields, so fighting, slaughterhouses, sharp instruments, and, transformation, that's a pretty serious transformation for the animals. Laboratories, because you have all those metals and chemicals and the cooking and the chemical reactions, that's Mars. Aggressive, violent contests, like typically like different sorts of sports and stuff like that. Stadiums, so again, contests, competitive, using that fire to compete. Blue collar work, because again, the things associated with Mars are more like, fire and metals and courage and things like that. Not that it's always blue collar work. I mean, again, if Mars is, linked up with other planets, like if Mars is linked up with Venus, which is the planet that represents, the arts, then you have Mars and Venus together. You can get somebody who's into design, or maybe architecture, where you have that, more engineering component as well as the aesthetic component. So not always, but a lot of times, if Mars is mostly by itself or with other malefic planets, you'd probably get blue collar work, or a place where blue collar work is done. And also buildings made of mud and bricks, because again, like bricks, you're using fire to heat up the mud to make the bricks to make the place, right? So let's see. So flowers, foods, trees represented by Mars. So red flowers, again, that fiery color. Red flowers, red lentils, thorny plants, that kind of prickliness, because Mars can be prickly. Things like stinging nettle and poison ivy. Not only do they prick, but then they cause inflammation and swelling and blistering because they're so caustic. Spicy peppers, mustard, garlic, especially raw, like all that hot, spicy stuff. Hemp, coffee, tea, because they're stimulating. Especially coffee is acidic as well as containing caffeine, and that's why people tend to drink coffee and tea in the morning to give them that kick, to get them going. Strong liquors, all that, like I think Native Americans call it fire water, like this. That's very Martian. Plants and foods with strong odors, because again, pitta, fire, it's intense, and so Mars is intense. So people who are Martian are going to be intense, and they typically tend to like intense food and intense activities, like that's mostly their nature. Although again, it depends on what other planets are around and how Mars is conditioned, where Mars is placed. Also, foods heavy in protein, like meat and legumes, because Mars represents muscle. So foods that build muscle, foods that are high in protein are Martian in nature. Stimulating foods, because again, Mars is a stimulating planet, and pungent, spicy flavors, that's all Martian. So time and distance with Mars. So the maturation age for Mars is about 28 years. So this is when you would, you might kind of find somebody chilling out a little bit with their Martian energy. They might be becoming, a little bit more mature. Mars as a personified person is a school-aged child, so somebody's pretty impulsive, young, immature, may not be thinking through all their actions, that sort of thing. Durations associated with Mars are like 42 to 56 years, so about half a century or so. It's fairly long. The season associated with Mars is Grishma, which is also ruled by the sun, and Grishma is about 20th of May to 19th of July, so basically cuffing summer solstice, right? The time of the year when the sun is the strongest, so that makes sense for both those fire planets. And then length, it's equal to 7 yojnas, and yojna is equivalent to about 4 to 8 miles, so that's equivalent to 28 to 56 miles. Yeah, if you're looking at distance with Mars. So, shape, color, gemstone related to Mars. So the shape related to Mars is the hourglass. The color is bright red. That's why this whole talk has been in bright red. Metals and stones. So copper, coral, bloodstone, carnelian. Those can be used. Now, I put a note here, like, I don't typically suggest, and I've been taught by my teachers of Jyotish, they don't generally recommend using gemstones. So I don't have a lot of information about it. I've been told that it's possible with gemstones that you not just sort of balance the negative qualities of planets, but you can enhance their negative qualities. So if that's of interest to you, I would find somebody who really knows what they're doing and consult with a professional who does know that stuff. But I thought I would just list it here for at least as a starting point. Okay, so there you go. There's Mars. Again, right now, today's Tuesday, and we've got an eclipse coming up, and I think Thursday, so within a couple days. And that's all happening in Aries, which is ruled by Mars. And Mars is not in Aries, except that it is trading houses with Mercury. Mercury is in Aries right now, so Mercury is in Mars' sign. And Mars is in Gemini, ruled by Mercury. So since Mercury is in Mars' sign and Mars is in Mercury's sign, you can swap them. It's called a parivartana. So actually, Mars is in its own sign, so to speak, and it happens that the sun is there, so the sun is exalted there, so we got a lot of firing on for this upcoming eclipse. So anyway, for those of you who are interested in Mars, thank you for taking the time to listen to this. I hope you found it useful and interesting. And until the next one, take care. Namaste.